everyone. You're watching Talking Heads, a Telum Media series where we speak to company leaders for their insights on business, communications, and leadership. Now, today we have with us Conall McDevitt, Penta's managing partner of Europe and Asia and former CEO of Hume Brophy. Conall, thank you so much for joining us.
How you doing?
Doing really good. I hope you're doing fine now, not too jet lagged.
Not too bad. Thank you very much.
Not too bad. All right. Now, Conall, it's been 2 months since Penta announced its acquisition of Hume Brophy, right? How do you think this move has strengthened both entities in terms of not just business growth, but also communication strategy?
Well, I think what the creation of Penta does is bring something new to the communications and reputation market, because essentially by creating Penta, we are building the first stakeholder solutions firm in the world. And that is a firm that takes great traditional communications consultancy, along with data insights, research, and other intelligence assets to create an end-to-end stakeholder solutions firm. And by that, I mean a firm that looks at all of any organization's primary stakeholder groups, customers, staff, investors, and policymakers, studies them as individual groups, but also as a collective, analyzes their interaction with each other and their interactions with the firm, their sentiment about the firm and about each other, and uses that as the basis on which to build reputation strategies and to, unearth actionable insights, which we can then use to deliver campaigns and traditional consulting services.
And speaking of insights, right? In this day and age, you can't really do without data. In the current information age, especially, data plays such a huge role in shaping communication strategies. How does Penta, intend to incorporate data into its communications consult, going forward, especially after the acquisition?
Well, we have our proprietary platform. We are able, using AI, to monitor over 25 million data points daily. We read nearly every publication in the world. We track all online activity. And we also use this to supplement our global media monitoring capabilities. And so as a result of our platform, we can compete with any other data analytics platform that's out there in the marketplace. What is different about us is that we are not just giving our clients the data. We are able to provide them with the insights and analysis on that data in a relatively short window. So our opportunity is to be able to say to clients and to organizations around the world, you need the data, but as much as the data, you need the insights and you need the analysis of what that data means for you in real time. And that is what we have been able to build in Penta. And we're able to do that because we are marrying essentially data teams with old-fashioned, tried and tested consulting expertise. And we are able to use our teams around the world, in Asia, in Hong Kong and Singapore, across Europe, across North America, to bring that local expertise and that local knowledge to the analysis and insights of the data.
And it's even more so important, I can imagine, in a global operation like yours, right? Now, what are your areas of focus in Asia for this year? And how do you plan on developing operations in this region over the next few years?
If you think about the world through the Penta lens, through these 4 key stakeholder groups, customers, staff, investors, and policymakers and regulators, then thinking about Asia, and more particularly thinking about the many different markets that Asia, of course, is made up of, it becomes probably the most exciting part of the globe in which to try and develop stakeholder solutions for firms. And that is for several reasons. At the micro level, at the level of the firm, there are so many fast-growing firms coming out of the Asian continent. And these firms are growing internationally within Asia, and of course, seeking to expand beyond the Asian continent as well. And as they grow and they scale, all of these stakeholder challenges become more significant and acute. And the reputational risk of mishandling their stakeholder relationships or misunderstanding how the stakeholder groups are relating to them and perceiving them is greater. And so if you think about Southeast Asia, for example, and Singapore as the great sort of hub to the Southeast Asian sort of community or the ASEAN community, you begin to sort of really see massive stakeholder management challenges as organizations scale. At the macro level, these become even more acute because at the macro level, you get things like geopolitics, you get differing worldviews, you're getting different corporate cultures, different governance standards, different regulatory frameworks all come into play. And so as an organization reaches a certain level of scale, and let's say it's breaking out of ASEAN and it's now targeting the European or North American market, it has to begin to adapt to European and North American stakeholder sentiment. And that can be very, very different. And we see great examples of this all over the world at the moment, where some of the challenges that Asian businesses face are not actually to do with the quality of their product or the great depth or expertise of their service offering. It's to do with the compliance and statutory compliance challenges of moving to another part of the world where the thresholds may be different, but also the cultural compliance, appreciating the norms and the behaviors that are expected. And of course, all of those challenges come from the stakeholders. They either come from within your staff, as you begin to hire Europeans or Americans. They come from your customers if they're outside of your home market, and their differing views and different sort of demands on you as a service provider or a manufacturer or provider of goods and services. They come from your investors because, of course, European and American investment is now entirely driven by ESG commitments, which place huge onus on the business, on the invested business, to behave differently with regard to its environmental standards, its social standards, governance standards. And finally, the policymakers and the policy community, well, that has a huge impact too. Whether it's at the macro level, thinking about relationships between the United States, Europe, and China currently, which are at a very interesting and challenging point, or whether it's around just getting trade deals done between, say, ASEAN and the European Union, or ASEAN and, the United States of America. So our analysis is that if you just look at reputation through the old-fashioned lens, you are failing to appreciate the significance of what is happening within your stakeholder community. And what we are trying to say to firms is you must begin to study and analyze and really appreciate the extent to which your stakeholder community is driving perceptions of you as an organization. And that means you must be much more disciplined and consistent about your messaging than you might have been in the past. Because stakeholders talk to each other and they influence each other as much as talking to you and trying to influence you directly.
Speaking of challenges, Penta recently released a white paper, right, on the top reputational risks that CEOs are talking about. Now, these risks include cybersecurity, misinformation, and even EDI strategies. In your opinion, which issue should company leaders prioritize the most and why?
So I don't think you can answer that question in the sense of saying it's this issue, because unfortunately it depends. And it depends, for example, on where you are around the world. It depends on what you do, what sector you might be in. It depends on what your ambitions for growth are. Are you happy or content to sort of stay operating within a particular part of the world or particular sector, or are you seeking to expand beyond that? So in order to know which issue a CEO or a leader must pay attention to, my advice to them would be you must study your stakeholders. And you must understand exactly what is driving them. And you must not rely on what they're saying on social media or what's reported in the newspapers, as important as that may be, alone. You must take time out to really invest in getting under the skin of what's driving your different stakeholders and their sentiments, and what are their motives and what are their own ambitions for your organization and for themselves. And in doing that, you will surface the issues that you need to focus on. And so our approach is to be very, very research-led and to advise CEOs and the C-suite generally around the world, irrespective of what scale they're operating at or what frame they're operating within, or how globalized or otherwise their business may be, to focus on understanding and studying your stakeholders. And that is through data and analytics. It's through primary research. It's through a momentum analysis, all of which are really interesting components of those studies. And to use that data to identify the issues that are really driving them. So in certain parts of the world, it could be that is DEI. And in other part of the world, it may not at all be the same level of an issue to manage. In some parts of the world, it may be the environmental standards in an ESG compliance. And in other part of the world, it may have moved to social or governance standards. So issues are not globalized. That's what I would say to CEOs. It is simplistic to say that issues are globalized at the firm level. What is globalized, though, is the fact that information is more available and more transmittable than at any point in the history of our species. And that irrespective of where you are in the world, you are managing a stakeholder community that has access to more information than ever before, and that are able to communicate in a disintermediated way. In other words, without having to rely on an editor in the newspaper or on some, point of control, in a more free way than ever before. And that is everywhere, irrespective of whether it's a democracy or not a democracy, whether it's an emerging economy or a highly developed economy. It is true of everywhere. And therefore, knowing and understanding what your stakeholders think, appreciating the issues that they are really, really focused on and that they care about, and aligning your strategy to meeting those issues in a positive way, which creates a win for them and a win for the firm, is, I think, what CEOs need to really get their head around. And that is a real departure, because no one in business school anywhere in the world teaches the CEO to care about their stakeholders beyond as individual groups. So they say, well, yeah, you need a finance structure to look after your investors, and you need a government relations team or a public affairs team to manage your regulatory compliance and so on and so forth. And you need a great media relation team and a marketing team to manage your external reputation with your customers. And you need a good HR function, an internal sort of focused team to manage your staff communications and management. But no one said that actually looking at those in silos is not enough anymore. You have to look at them as a totality, and you have to put them at the table. The stakeholders, in my opinion, are now sitting at the table in terms of decision-making at the boardroom level in large organizations. And in order for them to be at the table, you need to understand them as a group.
I'm interested to know, because of your comms background especially, what is one aspect of communication strategy that you personally find to be indispensable? And how would you say that guides your approach to leadership or your leadership style?
I think the thing that is still indispensable is the ability to write. What great communications teams need, what great reputation management teams need, what great stakeholder management teams need is good writers. They need people who can communicate well on paper. And why do they need this? Because every single stakeholder group needs consistent messaging. They need messaging that is appropriate and adapted to their group, but that is consistent across all different stakeholder groups. And at the heart of that is good writing. And people who can write are the foundation of great reputation and management teams. And people who can't write need to learn to write.
Is that something you've noticed, that there's something lacking in writing in comms these days?
In Penta, everyone goes through a writing test and always will. And, things like Chat GPT and all these great AI tools are brilliant. They're amazing. They can help do the basic research for us. I use it to help research stuff, but nothing takes away from your ability to be able to reduce complicated data to simple, understandable messages. And writing is not just the act of shaping a sentence. It is the process of assimilating information, processing that information in your head, using your intelligence to be able to analyze and identify the key insights or messages that need to be drawn out of that information, and presenting it back in an appropriate way to your stakeholder group. And that is a great skill that I would say is not just essential to be good at communications, but is a great skill and essential to be good at leadership. It is like one of the foundation stones of leadership is communication. And the way we will communicate forever and a day is in the written form. Oral communication is important, but you are unlikely to be a very good oral communicator if you're not a half decent writer. Or let me put it this way, if you are a good oral communicator, you will be a good writer if you just practice. And so for me, this is the foundation level stuff. Everything else is important in the context of the role. So being able to understand data is obviously very important for us in Penta. And, so we have a bias towards people who maybe study economics or a bit of STEM, as well as being interested in writing. And that's great because you're using both sides of your brain, right? And that's important to us. But in communications generally, whether you want to go down the data-led road like we do or not, you will still need to be able to write. And no one will ever take that away.
With such a dynamic market like Asia, how do you see the communications industry changing over here? And how is Penta poised, so to speak, to tackle these challenges, especially with all its competitors around?
I mean, that is a huge question. You could write a book about that, a really interesting book. So the way I would think about the communications market and sector in Asia is much the same as I would think about it in Europe, if I'm honest with you. It operates at three levels at its most simple. At the basic level, you've got national or regional communications activity, and that is teams of people who are focused on managing the reputations of organizations at a national level in small states like, say, Singapore, or at a regional level in, say, Sumatra in Indonesia, or, in Bali or somewhere like this, right? At the next level up, you've got the more sort of regional, as in several groups of nations, and then you've got global level communications at the third level. In Asia, we have great examples of all three. And they reflect the state of development of economies within the region at one level, but they also reflect the reality of the trading situation and just how trade is structured in the region. And so I think there is massive opportunity for Asian teams to become global communications leadership teams. And I see huge opportunity for people who are joining this profession in Asia and looking to make a career as a communications professional to become global chief communications officers, chief marketing officers, chief stakeholder officers, if you want to adopt the Penta view of the world. And I think there is all the correct university training now in place. There is no shortage of talent and of experience. And I would say to agency leaders, to consultancy leaders, and I would say to corporate function heads, please sit your chief stakeholder officer, your chief communications officer in Asia, and sit them in Asia to do a global job and challenge them to take a global view and to walk in Europeans' shoes and Americans' shoes and Africans' shoes and, in South Americans' shoes. But there is no reason why some of the greatest talent in our industry will not be Asian in the next 10 to 15 years. There's absolutely no reason. The level of economic growth, the level of talent, as I said, the ability, the adaptability, which is so core to so many Asian cultures, that sort of practical, pragmatic adaptability, it all lends itself to producing people and organizations and companies that can do this at the highest level globally. So for me, if I were starting my career now in communications or reputation management, and I were sitting in any of the large capitals across the Asian continent, I'd be thinking 20 years down the road and asking myself, how big could this organization or my function be? And the answer is as big as it is possible to get.
Thank you so much for sharing, Conall. Really appreciate all your insights today and being so generous with your time, really.
Thank you, Sam Joe. And people can find me in the usual places, so don't be shy.
Where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, just my name, Conall McDevitt. You can find me on Twitter, just my name, Conall McDevitt. You can just Google me or go to pentagroup.co. It's all there. But please, if there are people tuning in who have any questions or would like to pick up the conversation, you know where I am. It's a small world and it's good to talk.
I look forward to talking to you again, hopefully next time in person at one of our Telum events or when you're next in town again.
Absolutely. See you soon.
Okay, see you, Conall. Thank you so much. And this was Talking Heads with Penta's managing partner for Europe and Asia, Conall McDevitt. For more content like that, head on over to telummedia.com or find us on our socials at Telum Media.